At Memorial Woodlands, I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you all to this celebration of his life and to this farewell. A welcome to those of you who are here in person, and welcome to all those of you who have joined us online. While you may not be here with us in body, I feel sure you are with us here in heart. It's a big ask to wake up knowing that today is the day you have to say goodbye to the physical presence of the person you love. A big ask to travel here today knowing that this is your purpose. A big ask to wear a mask at this gathering of family and friends. A big ask not to offer a hug or a reassuring touch when this is the very thing that you most want and need to do. An even bigger ask to be faced head-on with saying goodbye to Robin. All of today is a big ask. So thank you for being up to the task. And it's your love and respect for Robin, a man whose life so positively impacted the lives of others, both professionally and personally, that makes you equal to it. It's your love and respect for him that will allow this occasion to be everything it needs to be. The number of you here today is small because of the difficult circumstances in which we find ourselves. But I ask you all just for a moment to imagine all the people Robin met and knew in his life, those who meant something to him and those to whom he was important. Imagine them here, and these seats, this chapel, would be full to overflowing. And that is such an important measure of a life. All the people whose lives we positively influence, however briefly, as we make our own journey through life. And Robin touched so many lives in such a profound and positive way. He was one of those rare people whose existence makes our lives immeasurably better. My name is Karen. I'm a celebrant with Humanists UK, and it's a real privilege to be here leading Robin's funeral ceremony this morning. In accordance with his beliefs and wishes, it will be a non-religious humanist ceremony. But please feel reassured that this is an all-embracing space and time, and everyone, whatever their faith or outlook, is welcome here. There will also be time later in the ceremony for private reflection and for those of you with a religious faith, prayer. I use the word embracing deliberately. When we lose something precious to us, the embrace we need is not always a logical one. And this space, with all of us gathered here, provides us with some of the elements of the embrace we need at this moment. Robin requested that he be buried, and a little later on we'll be walking with him past hedgerows and trees to his final resting place here at Memorial Woodlands. And how pleased he would be to know that he will become part of something so beautiful, that he will become part of the natural world that is all around us here. And I know from Hilary that Robin will be buried in his bird-watching clothes, not with his binoculars, which are on the coffin there. But rather than having hymns and prayers today, we'll be sharing memories and thoughts about Robin and stories from his life. We'll also be listening to words and music chosen with him very much in mind. Robin was passionate about music and had a particular fondness for the composers Rachmaninoff, Delius and Elgar. And you'll hear some of their music today. He loved live performances and regularly attended the Three Choirs Festival in Worcester and opera and ballet in venues in Bristol and further afield. When the Wexford Festival Opera staged a rarely performed Delius opera, he took the ferry to Rosslare and spent his evenings listening to the music he loved and his days looking for geese. And thank you to Ken Hall for sharing that recollection. Robin's other passions included steam engines and birds. And we'll be hearing a little about steam engines, but considerably more about birds. So Robin, I apologise if I don't get the balance quite right. And in writing this ceremony, I felt completely overwhelmed, and I have to say overwhelmed in a good way, by everything you were involved in, and continually amazed by your energy and enthusiasm. Now, I know that we can't do true justice to your life today, but I promise that we'll do our best. And I offer apologies in advance for anything I've missed out. Through his observations and understanding of the natural world, I'm sure that Robin understood very well that life does not come with guarantees. Our best and probably our only realistic plan is to live our own life in a way that enriches the lives of those around us, and in so doing, enrich our own life. And Robin, whether he fully realised it or not, enriched so many lives. His passion for birds was infectious, and he inspired others to care, just as he nurtured the careers of so many young ornithologists in the UK and abroad. Everyone who has spoken to me about Robin has talked of his kindness, his warmth, his generosity, his smile. And of course, there's his research. What he learnt has contributed so much to our collective knowledge of Britain's bird life, especially buzzards. And I know that so many people will be thinking about him today. I was fortunate to meet Robin on a number of occasions, but I didn't really know him. And I'm very grateful to his family and his many friends for sharing so generously with me so many of their thoughts and memories. And of course, some of you will be speaking during this ceremony. There have also been some wonderfully affectionate obituaries written by those who knew Robin, and I have to admit to having borrowed a little from them. So apologies to those authors, you know who you are. Robin was born 81 years ago and brought up as the middle child of 5. He had an older sister, Peggy, she's here today, and an older brother, John, and younger sister, Susan, who have sadly died, and another younger sister, Sally, who is also here today. When Robin was born, his mother, Beryl, heard a robin singing outside, and it inspired her to give her son his name. She could never have known then that it would come to have such significance in his life. Sadly, his father Horace died when Robin was still a child, and Robin went on to spend his early childhood in St Leonard's on the south coast, close to his mother's family. Peggy told me that Robin was a quiet and thoughtful child and was always wandering off on his own. Fortunately, he was always found by those sent to look for him. As a young boy, he went to Royal Wanstead School, a boarding school in Snaresbrook, London, coming home for occasional weekends and during the school holidays. At school, he conducted a breeding bird survey of the grounds, and it was perhaps this that really ignited his passion for birds and studying how they lived. On leaving school, Robin went to Enfield Technical College. By now, his family had moved to London, and his youngest sister, Sally, remembers pestering him to take her train spotting with him. Now, I've mentioned briefly Robin's love of steam trains, and on those occasions when Sally was allowed to accompany him, she and Robin watched them together from the bridge at Hornsey railway station. In fact, Sally remembers them waiting excitedly for the Flying Scotsman to come through, and Robin telling her that he wanted to get the number of every train in the country and to get them in sequence. And that early passion remained with Robin all of his life. Sally also recalls walking with Robin to the reservoir near their home. Robin would be looking for birds, and she would be looking at everything else. She told me that even at this early stage in his birding life, Robin was already very good at climbing trees, a skill that would prove extremely useful to him in the future. When he had finished his training, Robin joined Dexian Limited as a draftsman and structural designer. He was eventually sent by the company to Bristol to help expand their business in the southwest. Robin fell in love with the city and never left. He resigned from Dexian and needed to find another job. A serendipitous meeting with Mike Kendall and Richard Brock at the Natural History Unit, while birdwatching, they were all birdwatching in the Chew Valley, set Robin on a course for a career in natural history filmmaking. In 1968, he joined the NHU as a researcher, and he had the opportunity there to meet and work with other like-minded individuals, to work and live his passion, to work somewhere his knowledge of birds was respected, and his bird behaviour and identification expertise were highly valued. Robin was working on the NHU's sound catalogue when he first met Geoffrey Boswell and went on to become a member of Geoffrey's wildlife safari team. And these are Robin's own words. I remained with Geoffrey throughout the 4 wildlife safari series, to Ethiopia, Argentina, Mexico and Thailand, and I later worked with him on Private Lives. During filming in Ethiopia, some observations led to a couple of published papers, one on the waterbirds of Lake Tana and another on the association of the northern carmine bee-eater with mammals, other birds and motor vehicles. The bee-eaters perched on the backs of the walking birds and mammals, then sallied out to catch the insects flushed by them, as shown in one of the films. I was one of the team of 4 that went to Argentina with Geoffrey, and also Douglas Fisher, camera, and Donaldo McIver, fixer. I was the researcher and ornithologist. Geoffrey and I subsequently published a paper on the birds of Point Tombaugh, one of the locations on the Atlantic coast. This led to some friction between us. Steamer ducks come in 2 types, one which flies and one which is flightless. I reckoned that both species were there, but Geoffrey insisted that there was just one, the flying species. I should add that the flightless species was not known to be there. I won't go into all the details, but at one point I felt so strongly about it that I no longer wanted to be an author. Geoffrey persuaded me otherwise, I regret to say, as several years later, American ornithologists identified a new species of flightless steamer duck at Point Tombaugh. It was an opportunity lost by both of us. The Mexican series led to just one paper on the birds of the San Benito Islands, one of the filming locations. Robin went on to work on the Private Lives series with Geoffrey. He made The Private Life of the Water Vole and recalled that The Private Life of the Starlin was rejected from the Moscow Film Festival because the title had been mistranslated as The Private Life of Stalin. Later, he worked on pioneering live programmes such as Birdwatch and Badgerwatch that were the forerunners of Springwatch. The presenter of Birdwatch, Tony Soper, recalls Robin feeding him fascinating nuggets of information during the short breaks between live broadcasts. Robin found the live broadcasts from Florida, Kenya, and the Camargue especially rewarding. He also worked on the landmark series, The Living Isles, presented by Julian Pettifer, and was especially proud of Beneath the Greenwood, the programme in the series he produced. He also made a wildlife on one, Sparrows of St James's. It was filmed by Theo Cockrell, who described Robin as the most generous, tactful and kind person to work with. Robin worked on a wide range of both radio and television series throughout his career, and they provided him with a fund of stories to share with his friends and family. His niece Andrea, the oldest of his 6 nieces and 1 nephew, wrote, "Uncle Robin was the man we all liked to see on TV, whether he was in the jungle or telling us about the sparrows in St James's Park. As young children growing up in the 60s, it was exciting seeing our uncle on TV in exotic places around the world and listening to his stories when he came home. One was of a bug from the jungle that buried itself in his back and had to be extracted. I believe he kept it in a jar. I wish now I had listened and learnt more when he talked to us about the birds and birdsong all around us. Robin's brother John had emigrated to Australia, and Robin visited him there and his family in Melbourne several times. And I'd like to say welcome if there are any members of the family there in Australia watching this ceremony. Robin and John went bird watching together and very probably saw lyrebirds, the lyrebirds of Sherbrooke Forest. And John wrote a beautiful poem called Forest Morning, which was a poem about lyrebirds. And I'd like to invite Robin's brother-in-law, Laurie, to read it for us now.
From deep in shaded gullies wet, the lyrebird's resonant mimicry pierces through the still, calm morning air with crystal clear delivery. Aloft in leafy branches moist, kookaburras rang the dawn alarm, and the carolling magpies harmonised in the morning calm. Darkness soon turned to subtle blue, then declined to gentler hues and tones, a greeting to the working day, all the greening forest owns. Guardians of the great domain, ash and grey gum slowly grace the morn by spreading down in lofty awe through the eerie glow of dawn. The lessening misty glow, the yellowing rays of sunlight grew from a canopy to trunks to soil, drawing forth the sparkling dew. Soon, too, the cool, damp morning air, touched by the warmth of the growing day, seeks out the refuge of a stream where eternal dampness lay. Bold spirit of the lyrebird's song, like voices of an anthem ringing, rising from a cathedral green, the heart in glory singing.
Thank you, Laurie. Dan Freeman is a friend and former NHU colleague of Robin's, and I invite him now to share some of his memories of their friendship.
Thank you, Karen. I actually spent some time wondering what I could talk about that everybody who knew Robin would be able to relate to, because he had such specific interests across a wide number of people. So it just couldn't be about wildlife filmmaking or bird watching, let alone buzzard population dynamics or bird ringing in Chew Valley. It couldn't be about classical music or steam engines, and it couldn't be about books about Charles Darwin or the subconscious workings of the human mind. What it could be, though, was about friendship. Robin had a great many friends, drawn from his wide range of very different interests, and these different people are all united in being friends with Robin, each of them with a different way into, through, and now beyond their particular friendship. I'm sure you all know what I mean. My own friendship with Robin began with my first contract in the BBC Natural History Unit in Bristol in the late 1970s. Fate determined that Robin and I were to share the same office. He couldn't have been nicer or more aware of how intimidating a place like that could be to someone who'd never been there before. He took me to the canteen for coffee, lunch and tea, and after work he would take me to the club for evenings where it seemed to me that the main call of the evening would be "Hello, Robin," rather than "alcoholic." Everybody knew him. It was thanks to Robin, who had also introduced me to a number of production staff in the unit, that I went back to Oxford after 6 weeks, feeling very positive. We kept in touch. 3 years later, when I had just completed a 2-year contract in the film unit of the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds in Sandy, Bedfordshire, I received, out of the blue, a phone call from the BBC in London. They wanted to know if I might be available to work on a new series called Discovering Birds, to be presented by Tony Soper. Wow. Well, slightly shell-shocked and certainly flattered, I got through the conversation with the producer and I asked him towards the end how he'd got hold of my name. And he said, some chap in Bristol, Robin Prytherch, maybe? I don't know. Maybe that's the correct way to pronounce his name. I said it was, knowing full well that Robin would have corrected me as well about the proper Welsh pronunciation of his name, which nobody ever seemed to get right anyway. So Prytherch it remained. Anyway, I accepted the contract and telephoned Robin in Bristol just to say, well, thank you for this big favour. To which he replied, no, he said, I am the one to thank you. I didn't really get that. He said, the problem was that they wanted me to go back to London to work on the series. And you were the only person I could think of who might let me off the hook. He was right. Well, Discovering Birds was a success. And forever indebted to Robin, whatever his reasons, I came back to the NHU and to live in Bristol, this time with Becky. Now the wheels of friendship began to turn more rapidly. Robin became a serious family friend, even agreeing to be the godfather, non-religious of course, to our first son, Michael, born in 1984. Robin even chose us to be part of a privileged band of people, including Hilary, Ros, Lyndon and Sally Roberts, with whom he could share Christmas Day when he wouldn't be going over to Essex or Somerset or Sussex to be with his sisters and their families. 2020's COVID restrictions and his advancing cancer took their toll, though he still managed to complete his buzzard fieldwork last year. It was, he said, over one final lunch in the Fayland Inn on his 81st birthday last October, time to call it a day. I don't have a monopoly on Robin's friendship. Nobody does. Whatever our reason for coming into his life, we can all be equally grateful for having been the friend of one of the most interesting, helpful, and genuine people any of us will ever meet. That friendship will be missed beyond words.
Thank you, Dan. Robin wasn't a professional academic with a degree in zoology or biology. He was an intelligent and gifted amateur naturalist with a profound understanding and knowledge of his subject. British Birds is a journal for everyone interested in the birds of what we call the Western Palearctic, and it's been published monthly since 1907. It contains articles on all aspects of bird life, including behaviour, conservation, identification, ecology and taxonomy, and it aims to interpret scientific research in an easily accessible way. And it sort of fills that niche between the academic and the man in the street and encapsulates the idea of true citizen science. And Robin was a perfect example of a British birds writer, and he contributed papers throughout his time working in the Natural History Unit, throughout natural history filmmaking and beyond. He was also one of a team of 5 who helped save the journal when it ran into problems. And the role Robin played in turning its fortunes around is something that should be recognised and celebrated. And I think he would feel a sense of quiet pride that we are remembering his contribution today. Roger Riddington has been the editor of British Birds for 20 years. He's in Shetland and not able to be here with us today, and he's asked me to read his words for him. Robin's formal involvement with the journal British Birds began when he joined the editorial panel at the beginning of 1988, although his list of published papers and notes stretched back much further, to the early 1960s, in fact. Robin continued as a member of the editorial panel until December 2020. His all-round ornithological knowledge was perhaps his greatest strength as a reviewer for the journal. His interests and experience covered a wide range of topics, from populations and distribution through behaviour to identification, and he was an experienced ringer too. Many will remember him most for his long-term study of the common buzzard, which covered various aspects of the species ecology, but in particular its dramatic population increase in his study area close to his home in Bristol. Many of the key findings of that study were written up and published in British Birds during my time as editor. In 2000, Robin was one of 5 long-time supporters of British Birds who came together to rescue the journal at a particularly low point in its history, when it was under threat of closure. Robin and his colleagues became directors of a new company, British Birds 2000 Limited, which took over all aspects of producing the magazine and steered it back into less troubled waters. I first met Robin at the end of 2000 at my second interview for the post of editor. Much later, I learnt that he had had a key role in my subsequent appointment, arguing that the concerns of his colleagues about an editor living in Shetland and thus far from the main office and the printer, both in Sussex, were not necessarily a problem. Robin's vision of an essentially digital future was ahead of its time. Above all, I remember Robin for his good company and his ability to engage with such a wide range of people with evident enjoyment. And I suppose I will always think of him first and foremost in his blue British Birds polo shirt at our stand at the Bird Fair. He was a key part of that stand for all 3 days of every one of the 19 bird fairs that I attended for British Birds. COVID-19 robbed us of the 20th together. Many of his friends came to visit him on the stand, probably several of you here today. But he was no less warm and engaging to all those he didn't know. Robin was no marketing guru, but he was perfectly placed to converse about ornithology and talk about his favourite journal with a gentle authority that came so easily to him. He will be surely missed by so many people in the birding community. Thank you, Roger. And of course, the photograph on the front of your order of service is Robin in his blue British Birds polo t-shirt on the British bird stand at the bird fair. Robin's knowledge was not only invaluable to the films and radio programmes he worked on and the readers of British Birds, but also to BBC Wildlife magazine. And I'd like to hand over now to the magazine's former editor and Robin's friend, Ros Kidman-Cox.
Well, it was... I'm going to take my mask off. I'm allowed to.
You are allowed to take your mask off. Please do.
Yeah. It was Robin who'd always ring me up or come round to tell me if somebody in the natural history community was ill or who died. So I find it very sad that it's now me talking about him. Anyway, I met Robin in the early 1980s. And this was shortly after he'd begun his extraordinary buzzard study with the aim of understanding the bird's social behaviour. Human behaviour, psychology, was also an interest of his, no doubt influenced by events in his life, including a sometimes difficult friendship with his BBC colleague, the wonderfully unforgettable Geoffrey Boswell. Robin was one of that generation of observational naturalists, scientists in all but title who learnt everything in the field. He was also one of a rare breed, unhindered by ego and always willing to share. And like so many naturalists, he was a skillful illustrator of what he observed, as I'm sure everybody here knows, being recipients of his Christmas cards with his wonderful pen and ink illustrations of moments in the lives of his beloved buzzards. He, of course, became an invaluable consultant for BBC Wildlife magazine when I was editor. He also became a friend and a generous one with his knowledge of birds, always willing to take staff, friends and relatives alike out bird watching or even bird ringing. In the words of one of the recipients of his generosity, I'll never forget how gracious he was when he realised how ignorant we were. Robin was one of the last people that I remember in the Natural History Unit to be given a special leaving do in the BBC boardroom. And I'll never forget how the speech began. Robin is a true gentleman. That was shorthand for polite, educated and trustworthy, and probably in Robin's case, doesn't make a fuss if badly treated. Mind you, Robin was outspoken about mismanagement and political shenanigans, and many an after-supper conversation would involve table thumping. And when asked to, he would speak his mind in print, but always with erudition. For example, about the ridiculous decision to grant licences to shoot buzzards to protect game pheasants. And I quote from the end of his piece, that government departments feel at liberty secretly to break the law is scandalous. Furthermore, the ministers concerned should familiarise themselves with all the facts before making such important decisions. Do they understand what breaking the law means? I've lots of fond memories of events and stories, but there's one especially that says much about Robin's self-sufficiency, knowledge, patience and care. He once found a tiny baby swift on the pavement, not more than a couple of weeks old. This was in the days before the internet, but Robin, of course, knew what needed to be done and would rush home several times a day to feed the baby bird with compressed food balls of ground-up insects and things that he'd foraged. He reared it to fledging and had the joy of taking it outside, throwing it in the air and watching it take flight, and that to me was a miracle. One thing I know, I'll never forget him, too many reminders, including overhead the now wonderfully common sight of his special birds, the buzzards.
Thank you, Ros. Everyone I've spoken to has talked about Robin's wonderful Christmas cards, featuring his beautiful illustrations of the buzzards he had come to know so well. He had, of course, trained as a draftsman, and he was skilled with pen and ink, his work precise and accurate. He provided the illustrations for a number of books, including Michael Bright's The Private Life of Birds in 1993. And if you look at the back page of your order of service, you'll see 2 of his buzzard illustrations there. And I'll talk a little more about Robin's buzzards shortly, and also about BOC, Bristol Ornithological Club. But for now, I'm going to go off script a little and suggest we take a moment to listen to the Dawn Chorus in Robin's honour. In the early years of his arrival in Bristol, Robin became involved in the Bristol Naturalist Society, trained as a bird ringer, and new to Britain at Blagdon Lake. That bird was a North American pied-billed grebe, and when along with a small number of other bird watchers, Robin founded the Bristol Ornithological Club in 1967, he chose that bird as their logo. And since those early days, the club has grown, and it now has almost 600 members, produces monthly newsletters, and organises field trips, meetings, and surveys. And up until 2019, Robin led the club's annual New Year's Day trip to WWT Slimbridge, always writing his field report for the February edition of the newsletter. Robin joined his NHU work colleague Judy Copeland up to BOC in 1969, not long after the club was formed. And when I talked to her, she spoke of some of the wonderful trips Robin had led over the years and how he instinctively knew where to go to see the best birds. There were weeks at Tregarron Bog area for red kites, Anglesey for choughs and seabirds, Morecambe Bay for wheeling waders, and Solway Firth in Scotland for geese. She also mentioned a memorable holiday in Holland. The group was staying close to the Van Gogh Museum. but no one was allowed to visit, as it was a birding trip. She did say, however, that many on the trip did finally make it to the museum at closing time on the last day. She will be forever in Robin's debt for his wonderful, wide-ranging ornithological knowledge and expertise he was so willing to share. Another BOC member, Nigel Milbourne, wrote, "I first met Robin nearly 30 years ago while he was standing in a lay-by, staring out across the Gordeno Valley through binoculars, watching his beloved buzzards between Portishead and Clevedon. Of course, I had to stop and speak to him, and his kindness to a complete stranger and enthusiasm for his subject came pouring out." Brenda Page remembers Robin's kindness to novice birders and his generosity with his time and knowledge. Jeff Holmes talked about going on a migration watch with Robin as a wide-eyed teenager in 1973. Robin gave him a lift early one morning, and Jeff was amazed to hear him identify birds by their calls when they passed overhead. He remembers Robin saying in his quiet, confident tone, "Don't worry, you'll soon learn," and how those few words really encouraged him. I have read and heard the phrase Robin's beloved buzzards so many times over the past couple of weeks, and Robin's buzzards were truly beloved and incredibly well studied over a period of 40 years. Robin's buzzard patch was 75 square kilometres of farmland in the Gordeno Valley. He mapped their territories, observed their behaviour, choice of nest sites, and the food they brought to their young. He knew them all individually and knew their history and ancestry, and each year he illustrated their stories on the Christmas cards he sent to his family and friends. Lyndon Roberts is Robin's friend, fellow ornithologist, and beautyophile. I hope I pronounced that correctly, a lover of buzzards. And these are his words. "I first got to know Robin in the early 1990s. Over the following 20 years or so, we visited countless buzzard nests in the North Somerset area. He was the climber, and I acted as groundsman. Robin would lower buzzard chicks to me, and I would ring, weigh, and measure them, while he enjoyed a buzzard's eye view of the surrounding landscape from the nest site. In later years, he would meticulously draw, measure, and record each nesting platform, as well as taking notes of prey items. Robin was incredibly devoted to his study of buzzards. When he was not climbing to nests, he would spend hours almost every day observing their behaviour. His ability to recognise individual birds allowed him to map their territories and follow their life stories in fascinating detail. I think the things I will remember most about Robin are his extraordinary powers of observation in the field and his fastidious attention to aspects of behaviour and identification that would elude most birders, including myself." Over the years, so many people grew to recognise Robin's car when it was parked anywhere near his study site and would know immediately that he was buzzarding. Mary Colwell is a natural history filmmaker and writer, and she interviewed Robin, her friend and colleague, for her soon-to-be-published book, Beak, Tooth and Claw, Living with Predators in Britain, and she's kindly agreed to read an extract from that book for us today.
It requires skill and judgment to recognise a moment of great change and then have the presence of mind to record it for posterity. In the case of buzzards, their return to one part of the UK was captured by an octogenarian ornithologist, artist and storyteller, Robin Prytherch. Robin's top-floor flat in the Clifton district of Bristol has a buzzard's eye view over Georgian rooftops and across to the wooded cliffs of the Avon Gorge. Spread out on a coffee table are 3 maps of a 75 square kilometre patch of farmland and woodland on the southern edge of the city. I first got interested in a buzzard survey in 1979, says Robin. There seemed to be more around than people thought. A few years later, Robin had set up his own research area and started the longest continuous study of buzzards ever undertaken, right at the point when they began their miraculous comeback. He has dedicated thousands of hours to ringing and monitoring, drawing and writing about them. Every Christmas he sends out hand-drawn cards of the local buzzards, and each one tells a story gathered from hours of observation. Sifting through a pile of these cards, I can only marvel at the obvious intimacy between man and bird, a relationship fostered over decades. Many have names like Riv, Honey, Speckles, Goss and Spotty, individual characters in a 40-year buzzard soap opera featuring episodes of loss and success, faithfulness, bigamy, incest and violence. One card shows a regal-looking buzzard on a branch with a couple of others perched on a leafless winter tree in the background. This was Tess, the best breeder in my study area. She fledged over 43 chicks in her lifetime. Her first mate in 1984 was Tertials, and they had 13 chicks together. But he died in 1991 after a few vicious fights with another male, Tough, who took over as Tess's partner. Tough, Tess and Tertials, the 3 T's of North Somerset, living out their long lives in the damp fields and woodlands of North Somerset's Gordano Valley, their intimate behaviour scrutinised and recorded by Robin. Whatever events were playing out in the human sphere, the buzzards were in their parallel world, dealing with the ups and downs of their own event-filled lives. My attention is now on the maps spread out on Robin's coffee table. The first shows the territories he'd mapped in 1988. 19 large amoeba-like shapes are drawn over the landscape, encasing both patches of woodland and farmland. The next map from 1997, just 9 years later, shows far more blobs, and they're more squashed together. The third map for 2007 is even more densely populated. By Robin's reckoning, there were now 92 occupied territories, showing a near 400% increase in 30 years. This year, 2019, it looks like we have 120 territories, he said, and they have just about got to saturation point. They now defend much smaller areas. I think they're full up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Robin was also a long-standing member of the British Trust for Ornithology, and he served on committees and took part in many of its surveys, including heron recounts at Chew Valley Lake and Cleve. And he was a mainstay of the Chew Valley ringing stations and saw the training of newcomers to ringing as especially important. I'm told by Lyndon Roberts that while Robin was an occasional visitor to the Gordano Valley ringing station, his loyalty was always to Chew Valley Lake. Apart from ringing buzzards, he also helped with other projects that involved tree climbing, including ringing barn owls and kestrels. And Robin's early love of climbing trees, observed by his sister Sally, certainly paid off. Robin made so many friends through his work and through his lifelong passions. And there are, I know, 3 people who count Robin as a very good friend and lunched regularly with him. Sophie Cole and Di Williams are here, but sadly Jane Miller was unable to come today. But I'd like first to invite Di to speak.
I first met Robin in 1980 when I moved from BBC London to the NHU. He was one of the first friendly faces I saw and remained a firm friend for the next 41 years. Can't believe that. When I left the Beeb for a short foray into independent wildlife production in 1990, Jane, Soph and myself formed a tight and lasting lunch club, meeting at least once a month. Started at the tiniest Chinese restaurant ever opposite the production house, and when that closed, we moved to the Thai on White Ladies Road. We all had Geoffrey Boswell in common. It gave us a lot to talk about. Roberts went on a few of Geoffrey's 3-month trips to the Far East and South America, etc., and had loads of stories to keep us entertained. And we also put the world to rights in those short lunch breaks. And latterly, after Robin, then Jane, and then I retired, these lunches got somewhat longer. Robs was so generous with his time, knowledge, and gentle good-heartedness. Many times he would lead bird expeditions and walks for me and my friends and family to Slimbridge, Chew Valley Lakes, or the Mendips. One memorable early morning, he produced hot pea soup in a flask whilst pointing out different waterfowl from a hide. He was an inspiration to me and many others who've gone on to know more about and love our feathered friends. And I too look forward every Christmas to receiving his Christmas card. I've kept most of them, and I'm going to frame some now in Robin's memory. We'll miss him. He's one of those people who make a difference in this world.
Thank you, Di. These words are from Jane. Robin gave me my first job in the NHU in 1975. He was working up on the top floor of the building in a very small office. The interview was to work for Geoffrey Boswell, who, as you will all no doubt know, had something of a reputation. Robin handled Geoffrey so well and was so kind to me. He has remained a very, very good friend for more than 45 years. I miss him. Jane talked to me of Robin's lovely kindnesses. When she remarked on a piece of music she had heard and liked by a composer she didn't know, Robin turned up to their next lunch meeting with a potted history of Boccherini for her. She will always remember his laugh and the fact that he laughed often. And now I'd like to hand over to Sophie.
I never worked with Robin, so out of our lunch quartet, Robin and I knew each other the least to start with. 30 years on, we really got to know each other very well indeed. I was the youngest of the group and he the oldest, but it never seemed like that as we had so much in common and always so much to talk about. We shared a passionate love of music and radio with a long-running debate about which radio station to be continually tuned to, Radio 3 or Radio 4. I will always treasure the list that Robin gave me of all the operas he'd been to, and there were many. In fact, Robin's passionate and enthusiastic nature was one of the many things I loved about him, and we were invariably on the same side whenever our lunches strayed into more dangerous political ground. He was stoic about his illnesses, both recently and over the years, and although he mentioned to me a month or so ago that he wished his sisters were nearer, he always spoke of how wonderful Hilary and Dan were, and how grateful he was to be so very well looked after. I absolutely shared his love of birds, although we diverged totally when it came to knowledge and skill in that area, as rather embarrassingly I still know absolutely nothing 31 years on. Luckily, he never seemed to mind. So thank you, Robs, for your loving friendship over the years. How I wish we could continue those conversations. There is still so much I wanted to learn from you and discuss with you. When we 3 remaining lunches eventually reconvene our lunch club after the restrictions have gone, we'll be raising a glass of red to you and wishing you were still with us, sharing your love, your laughter, your intellect, and that twinkly smile.
Thank you, Sophie. And now I'd like to invite Sally to read her tribute to her older brother, Sally.
Farewell to a true good egg. Many of you will know that Robin often used this expression at the end of a conversation. So we're here today to say goodbye to Robin. He was part of our family for 81 years, although for most of us, this time would have been much shorter. But he touched our lives in many ways. However, sometimes family and friends sadly have to leave each other. Death does not mean the end of a friendship. It just means that garden robin watching over you is someone you know and love. And as long as we can live in each other's memories and dreams, then we can never truly die.
Thank you, Sally. I'm sure that you all have so many personal memories of Robin, and I'm going to invite you now to take some time for your own thoughts. With him very much in your minds, just take a moment to reflect on his life and your relationship with him. Those of you with a religious faith may wish to use this time for prayer. We're going to listen to a song of summer by a composer much loved by Robin, Prytherch. And please, those of you who wish to, do come forward and light a candle for Robin. We just have to remember about social distancing. This is a song of summer. How could we not let Robin's buzzards have the last word today? Hilary is Robin's dear friend, and she's going to read for us The Buzzards by Martin Armstrong.
Just before I start, I'll just tell you how I know Robin. So I met Robin in the late 1980s at the BBC Natural History Unit, and we worked together on several live watch programmes, some on birds and a badger watch. And we sort of shared a long interest in British wildlife and particularly birds. And when Robin left the Natural History Unit, our friendship continued, and he was a good family friend, often spending Christmas with our family and Dan's and Rosie's as well. And he always arrived very smartly dressed. He'd have a bottle of wine and a bunch of flowers and also cheese. He'd go to the deli and get some lovely cheeses, which he'd make little labels for and lay them out on the table so we could read in his tiny copper plate writing where the cheese came from and what it should taste like. And we were always really pleased to have him at the family, because when Robin was there, the children behaved much better. You know, they had to be good. And he was very popular because he had a habit of slipping £10 notes into Christmas cards. So they'd open their cards and be really, really pleased. Anyway, Robin was a very good friend. We'd see each other most weeks for a cup of tea and a gossip. We often walked and we always talked. And we talked about everything from Dawkins to his gas bills, a little bit about steam trains. I'd try to wind that one up. And more lately to the horrors of technology and smartphones, which drove him mad. Anyway, he was a man with many passions, as we've all found out. And this is a poem with what we can share, one of his biggest passions, The Buzzard by Martin Armstrong. When evening came and the warm glow grew deeper, and every tree that bordered the green meadows and in the yellow cornfields every reaper and every corn shock stood above their shadows, flung eastward from their feet in long measure, serenely far there swam in the sunny height a buzzard and his mate, who took their pleasure, swirling and poising idly in golden light, on great pied, motionless moth wings borne along, so effortless and so strong. Cutting each other's paths together they glided, then wheeled asunder till they soared divided, 2 valleys' width, as though it were delight to part like this, being sure they could unite so swiftly in their empty free domain. Curved headlong downward, towered up the sunny steep, then with a sudden lift of the one great pinion, swung proudly to a curve, and from its height took 1/2 mile of sunlight in one long sweep. And we, so small on the swift, immense hillside, stood tranced until our souls arose uplifted on those far-sweeping, wide, strong curves of flight, swayed up and hugely drifted, were washed, made strong and beautiful in the tide of sun-bathed air. But far beneath beholden, through shining deeps of air, the fields were golden, and rosy turned the heather, where cornfields ended. And still those buzzards wheeled, while light withdrew, out of the vales and to surging slopes ascended, to the loftiest flaming summit dyed to blue.
Thank you, Hilary. We find our meaningfulness, our capacity to flourish in the connectedness we have in being together as human beings. And it seems to me that Robin was such an interconnected being, both professionally and personally. He connected with people wherever he went, and he flourished in that connectedness and enabled others to flourish too. And we are all connected. We are connected because we share the same origins, because we are family or friends or colleagues or neighbours or part of the same community, or simply because we are all part of humanity and we all share this incredible planet. So thinking about how we are connected in this way, please take a moment to think about Robin and to remember all the ways he will remain connected to you and you to him. In her Wreath Lectures, the writer of historical novels, Hilary Mantel, said, "The dead are invisible, they are not absent." What survives of Robin is the influence and impact he had on everyone who knew him, and what stays in your memories. And this ensures that he is not just part of what is past. He is part of you, part of the present, and part of the future too, because each of you carries something of him into the future. He enters the future through all of you who knew and loved him and who shared his life. He enters the future through his work, all the knowledge and understanding he has left. He enters the future through every kind, thoughtful, courageous and funny deed. These words are from Michael Josephson's What Will Matter. Living a life that matters doesn't happen by accident. It's not a matter of circumstance, but of choice. Choose to live a life that matters. And I think Robin chose to live a life that matters. Shortly we'll be leaving here to walk with Robin to his place of burial. But before we go, I'd like to remind you that if you'd like to leave a donation in his memory, his family and friends have chosen Prostate Cancer UK to benefit from your generosity. Please make your donations directly to the charity and you'll find the details on the back page of your order of service. I would ask you just to wait until Robin's coffin has been carried out of the chapel and into the hearse before leaving. And as we're waiting, we're going to listen to Piano Concerto No. 2 by another of Robin's favourite composers, Rachmaninoff, before leaving here to follow behind the hearse. You're all invited to come, but I understand if it might be a little too difficult for some of you, that's absolutely fine too. But this is Rachmaninoff, Piano Concerto No. 2.